In this story filled with betrayal and despair, the protagonist Kyra finds herself trapped in a dark dungeon, with her friends Azriel and Zion also in dire straits. As time passes, Kyra must confront not only her own fears and helplessness, but also Azriel's control and manipulation. Will Kyra be able to find a way to escape this hell, or will she forever become Azriel's puppet? How will her fate affect those she loves? Explore the unknown, subscribe to Kyra's adventure. Chapter 60. I didn't know how much time had passed. Hours, days, weeks. I really couldn't say. All I knew was the maddening dripping of water, the darkness surrounding me, and the thin lining of mildew in my lungs that rendered it difficult to breathe. Azriel's transformation had stopped a while ago, and she'd remained still on the ground ever since. I'd called out to her, begging her to wake up, but she didn't respond. In her cell, I could see that her clothes had been shredded, her skin torn in places. I didn't know if she was dead or not, a fact that drove me insane. There was a lot of silence from Zion's end, too. His frantic calls had stopped long ago. He'd muttered something about the wolfsbane kicking in, but I didn't quite register it over Azriel's snarling. Before long, his head was drooping along with his shudders, and then he was out. Then, as though fate really had it out for me, the torch nearest to his cell had guttered, leaving him in total darkness. It was too dark to check if he was still breathing, to search for any signs of life. I didn't know if he was alive, dead, or lost somewhere in between. It was to the point where I'd convinced myself I was the last living soul in this dungeon. Tears had welled, silent and hot as they trailed down my cheeks. Sometimes, they had come out as violent sobs, raw and guttural. Other times, they were silent, steady tears numbing. I cried until my eyes stung, until my throat had swollen to the point where it was difficult to breathe. By then, I almost felt nothing. I lifted my head from its space between my knees, staring at the small bowl that had been deposited inside my prison. People had come by to deliver food to our cells, not without some vile words to Zion before they left. Never Azriel, though he hadn't come by since he'd thrown me in here. I considered it a blessing. I inhaled the mildewed air, the scent of the soup becoming ever more appetizing to my senses. I wasn't going to eat, I decided. No, I'd rather die down here than be Azriel's puppet. More than that, I felt I deserved such a fate. Desperate for a distraction, I looked towards Azriel's cage, straining to see any movement, for any hint of life. Nothing. Not so much as a breath. I swallowed my fear, along with the sinking suspicion that I'd killed my friend. Kyra. A voice breathed from the darkness. It was so quiet, I thought I was hallucinating. That was until it came again. Kyra, are you awake? I rushed to my bars quicker than lightning, straining my eyes in the direction of Zion. Darkness still cloaked his cell. Zion. I whispered, you're alive. Silence. Hadn't we been in this situation, I would have taken that silence for smugness. Yes, I'm alive, he said, voice weak yet spirited. I could almost feel his sad grin. It takes more than a little wolfsbane to kill me. I bit back a sob of relief. Thank God. Thank God he'd lived. I hadn't allowed myself to contemplate what I'd do if he died. I'd blocked it from my mind, resisting its instant tugs. I didn't want to think about it, even when it became ever more plausible. I blew out a shuddering breath. Alive, I reminded myself. Alive. Silence ensued. I didn't know what to say, and it seemed he didn't, either. When it became unbearable, I blurted the first thing that came to mind, Zion, I'm sorry for not heeding your warning. I should have listened to you, I was stupid and naive. Silence, followed by a low sigh. It's fine, Kyra, he assured, though he sounded far from fine. I can't blame you, my beta-alpha bond stops me from speaking treason, so it wasn't like I could convey the clearest message. Looking back, I can see why you wouldn't believe me. I hung my head. So Zion was controlled by Azriel as well. Why is he doing this? I asked, my knuckles whitening as I grasped the iron bars. I welcomed the painful bite of metal. Why would he betray us like this? Zion sighed. I don't mean to scare when I say this, Kyra, but... Well, actually, nothing can get any scarier than this. Silence. I strained to hear his next words, dread building in my gut. Kyra, he plans to use you to build an army of Upsilons. With it, he plans to conquer all 4 territories. My heart dropped to my stomach. What? I stammered. How? Why? When you and Epsilon bite a human, they become Upsilons. Silence again. Upsilons run solely off emotional energy, and, as you may know, that's very dangerous, especially when they run off emotional energy alone. You have balance because you also possess lunar energy. They don't. They will listen to whoever and whatever their leader is, and once they become loyal, they will serve that leader to whatever end. This is bad, Kyra, really bad. I could hear the genuine fear in his words, the need to act something both he and I knew we couldn't do behind those damned bars. It was selfish of me to ask, considering all that had happened to others around me, but I couldn't help it, and what will he do to me? My voice was quiet, near silent and weak. I didn't have to see Zion to know he was staring at me with pity. He'll take you out this cell and make you bite whatever human they manage to capture, he said quietly. I overheard him saying that exact line to his Zeta. That's when I knew. I knew what he was planning. That's why I had to warn you. My knuckles tightened. His damned Zeta. Leave it up to his left-hand strategist to plot our demise. And leave it up to me to ignore such an important warning. But I still had a pressing question on my mind. How is he controlling me, Zion? It feels like there's an invisible hand controlling my body. I don't. How? I feel silent. The air around us seemed to thicken. Kyra, I need to give you a lesson on mates, he began. A tense pause followed, and I wondered if he was going to tell me something else, but then he continued, mates are supposed to be equal in power. There's no way 2 people can be truly mated to each other without that equity in power. There are cases where only one person may experience the mate bond, but that's just a dud bond because it's not meant to exist there in the first place. And the other person will never be mated back to them. A hard pause. I noticed how his last words seemed rushed, but didn't press him on it as he continued, you see, a mate bond is very binding. In a sense, you become one mind, one soul, one body. That equality in power is crucial. Then how did he put the mate bond on me, even if we are not mates? I blurted. You don't need to be mates to place a mate bond on each other, Kyra, he said. Which is why it becomes detrimental. If someone who is not your mate claims you, and you claim them back, you create an unstable bond. People have done it before in the name of love, but it always becomes back down to a power struggle. One wolf will always be able to dominate the other. You see, Azriel can control you through this false bond, because he had more power than you. It's why true mates are always equal in power. I swallowed, pondering. It made sense. In fact, it made a lot of sense. I'd felt a connection, sure, but maybe that was just the closeness of love. Maybe I'd mistaken a mortal emotion for something much greater, much more powerful, and now my ignorance was paying the price. Is there a way I can take control of the bond? I quizzed, or even just terminate it. His silence told me everything. That would require you to gain power, Kyra, which means you need access to your magic. Something Azriel has cut off. Right now, there's nothing that can be done. The words reverberated down my skull, turning my skin to ice, as my worst fears were confirmed. There was truly no way out of this. No way out of this dungeon, out of this cell, or even out of Azriel's grasp. But something else bothered me, much more than my false bond with Azriel did. Zion. I took his silence as my cue to talk and, swallowing, asked, "Will Alia survive the transformation?" Silence. For a moment, I worried he wasn't going to answer. Only time will tell. Not all humans will survive the transformation. Luckily, Upsilon transformation is more successful than Epsilon transformation. All we can do is hope. 1 in a million. That's what I was, 1 in a million, a human who could undergo the Epsilon transformation and survive. But Zion only said Upsilon transformation had better success, but not by how much. I didn't have it in me to ask, and I had a sinking suspicion he'd omitted that statistic to spare my feelings. Tears pricked my eyes, but I nodded all the same. How stupid. How selfish of me to bring Alia into this world, into this mess. If I had just let go of the past, let go of her, then maybe she wouldn't be laying on a cell floor with the prospect of death hanging over her head. If she hadn't died already. Kyra, came his voice. It wasn't so much a question, but rather a command for my attention. Yes? Have you? His voice trailed off. We sat in silted silence for a few moments longer, and I found myself itching to hear what he had to say. Have you ever felt a strong connection with anyone? I don't mean just Azriel, but anyone at all. There seemed to be another aspect to this question, some hidden query he was trying to have me answer. Even so, I thought back over those past few months. A strong bond. What could he mean? The person I'd felt closet to was Azriel, but even that had been fake. No, I replied solemnly. I haven't. Silence. Heavy silence, so much that I found myself squirming. Zion. Just then, the deafening screech of iron against stone filled the halls, followed by a large crash seconds later. I listened intently to the sound of footsteps on cobble, trying to discern who it could be. Over the past few days, I'd been able to distinguish who was who simply by the sounds of their footsteps, discern which gamma would deliver me my watery soup. I glanced towards the bowl, and when I saw steam furling from its surface, confusion ran through me. Why would they be so back so early? I slithered across my nape. I felt him before I even saw him. Then again, what else could I have expected with a mate bond, even if the bond itself was a fake? Sure enough, the footsteps stopped once they reached my cell, the figure that loomed behind the bars casting shadows across the walls. I stared at my feet, determined not to look at him, at the man who had ruined everything for me. Kyra. He whispered, voice impossibly soft. I kept my head down and eyes forward, determined not to look into that gorgeous yet hateful face. However, all self-control was snatched from my grasp as an invisible force yanked my head up, forcing me to stare into those glittering, azure eyes. A wicked smile crossed those lips. It's good to see you're doing well, my dear. Do not call me your dear, I hissed, giving him the coldest glare I could muster. His sinister chuckle echoed off the walls, off every stone and crevice. Ah, now doesn't that one give us déjà vu, he drawled, a smirk crossing his lips. He stared at me for a few moments, his expression slowly changing of that from smug to concerned. I knew I'd lost weight over the past few days. I could feel it in the hollowness of my cheeks and the coldness in my bones. I didn't care, though. Let me starve. I would rather die than live a slave. Sure enough, his eyes glided to the uneaten soup on the ground, a soft scowl taking root on his face. Why aren't you eating, dear? He asked, voice soft but edged. I blinked. Why would he be so concerned with my health? Oh, that's right. I needed to be alive to be his slave. But the look in his eyes didn't say that. In fact, they almost looked sorrowful. I shook the thought away, anger consuming every inch of my being. This was just his acting. He didn't actually care. He'd had years to master emotions. I couldn't trust any look that passed over his face. I would rather starve than be your slave, I ground out, giving him a glare that would send any other man running. I bared my teeth at him, though without my sharpened canines, it didn't have the intended effect. And even if you don't let me starve, I will find a way to escape your grasp, even if it means death. Azriel's face fell, soft sorrow in his eyes as he regarded me. Kyra, you know it's not like that. As I said, we can cooperate together. We can rule the world. But I can see that you do not understand that yet. Maybe it was the softness of his expressions, maybe it was the emotions that looked so genuine, or maybe it was just his words, for my anger boiled up within me, exploding from my mouth with a loud, "Get out." The male visibly flinched, eyes wide at my words. I allowed my mouth to fall shut, remembering my position. Two of my friends were barely standing, and if he wanted, Azriel could punish my little outburst by hurting them or worse, killing them. And with his eyes dipped in the shadows, I couldn't tell if he was debating the same thing. Silted silence ensued. Then, blowing out a long breath, Azriel stepped forward, his lips downturned and eyes sad as he said, "You will understand this all one day, Kyra," he added, "I love you." The words were like a slap to the face, but I didn't have long to ponder them before the male turned away and stormed off down the halls, the only sound to comfort my raging thoughts being his boots against the wet cobbles. Chapter 61. Aside from the few muttered words from Zion, there was very little to break the silence of the cells. I found myself growing hungrier with every hour I resisted the food, and many times I debated giving in. But I didn't. If I did, I would be handing Azriel yet another small victory. I couldn't do that, even if he had victory over almost every other aspect of my life. My pride would not allow it. Even so, my spirit was dimming, and the worst was still yet to come. So, when another sound filled the chambers, one that wasn't from neither Zion nor I, my heart lit up with hope for the first time in a while. "Alia," I whispered, my voice hoarse but hopeful. I knew this much hunger and isolation was enough make me hallucinate, and kick off my first descent to madness, but I had to hear her voice. I had to believe it was real. Just then, a stirring came from the cell opposite mine, along with a low groan. I watched like a hawk as the dark bundle gathered from slumber, sitting herself upright as she asked, "Where am I?" I bit back a sob. It was Alia, all right. I could even picture that clueless look on her face, even with her being shrouded in darkness. "Alia, it's me, Kyra," I whisper-shouted, afraid someone was listening in. "Kyra." "Yes, that's me," I said again, barely containing my joy. Zion remained silent, but I sensed he was listening in. "Where am I? Where are we?" she asked, the dread in her voice making my heart sink. That initial excitement dwindled, replaced instead by that festering hopelessness that had been eating me alive these past couple of days. "Alia, I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry for dragging you into this mess. I swear, if I could go back and change things, I would." Silence. "Kyra, what are you talking about? What's going on?" she asked, her voice shaking. I swallowed the hard lump in my throat. "We've been locked up, Alia," I said slowly, hating every word. You weren't supposed to get caught up in this mess. But please, give me a moment to explain everything." I listened out for a reply, and all I received was silence. I took that as my cue to continue. "I was turned into a werewolf, Alia. That night at Sienna's party. I know this is hard to believe, trust me, I know, but I transformed into a werewolf, fangs and claws and everything. I went into the forest where I stumbled upon this court. It was like something out of a fairy tale. I wanted to come back to the human world, Alia, I really did. But the werewolf curse causes a human with any recollection of you will forget. I didn't believe it at first, and I did try to come back, really. But not even my own mom remembered me. So I had no other choice than to live life here. I stopped, the echoes of my voice bounding eerily throughout the chamber, as though mocking the stupidity of my words. For some time, I eagerly awaited Alia's answer, the screaming, the questions, the injustice. None of it came. No, because what she said was a lot worse. Kyra, I never forgot about your existence. It felt like someone had knocked me upside the head with a frying pan. What? I stammered, feeling my face drain of color. I could even feel Zion's apprehension at her remark. Yeah? She continued, it was odd. One day, everyone knew your name. The next, every hint of you was gone, you along with it. At first I thought it was some sick prank, because none of the girls seemed to remember your existence. It was only when I asked your parents did I realize that. Oh God, Kyra, it was horrible. I swallowed, trying to process everything I'd just heard. So Alia had remembered me, but why? But then that brought about more questions. What would have happened that day had I gone to her rather than my parents? If I had ignored Azriel's words to give up and kept trying anyway? Would things be different? Would I still be in this mess? Had Azriel known that Alia still remembered me? But why are we here, Kyra? Alia asked, as though reading my train of thought. And I do believe you when you say you're a werewolf. Hell, after the memory thing and the bite. I just know it's true. Guilt soared through me. The bite. That wasn't me who bit you, Alia, I said, swallowing. Well, technically, yes, it was me, but I wasn't really in control of my body. You see, there's a lot I need to tell you. So I told her everything from me starting as a rookie werewolf, saving the territory, falling in love with the pack's alpha, only to be betrayed by him later on. Once I was finished, all there was to greet me was stunned silence. Kyra. She whispered, I'm so sorry. I could hear the tears in her voice. It sent me over the edge as everything, the guilt, the sorrow, the regrets flooded to the surface. No, Alia, it's all my fault, I sobbed, hot tears slipping down my cheeks. I shouldn't have brought you here. I shouldn't have even mentioned you. I was stupid. Don't blame yourself, Kyra, she assured me. You had very little options. You were just doing what you thought was right. I stared at the ground, tears blurring my dimmed vision. We sat in silence for the longest time, until Zion said, well, come out of this. I jumped, and I suspected Alia did, too. I had almost forgotten of Zion's existence. People like him are blinded by greed, he continued, undeniable resentment to his tone. I could almost picture that trademark sneer on his lips. He'll make a blunder one day, and when he does, we'll make him regret it. I didn't respond. However, I was surprised when Alia did, and who are you? I'm Zion, the beater of this pack. Well, ex-beater now, I suppose. Your friend Kyra and I go a long way back. Despite myself, despite everything, I smiled. Friends. It was funny how it hadn't always been that way. Just then, a loud screech sounded at the end of the hall. The sounds of shuffling filled the space. All three of us got to our feet, peering out the bars. My heart sunk as that familiar scent wafted in my direction, his presence both repulsive and unnerving. Of course, I wasn't surprised when he stopped right outside my cell. Good evening, my love, Azriel drawled, the shadows playing all sorts of ominous tricks across his face. I tried not to focus on his eyes and instead on his forehead, remembering my old technique. When I didn't respond, Azriel shot me a suggestive smile. Ah, playing hard to get, I see. You were always like that, dear. Even in bed. I could have sworn Zion bristled in his cell, though over my own radiating frustration, I couldn't say for sure. He chuckled. But do not fret, dear. I did not come here for mere chit-chat. My stomach sank, and for a moment I froze. What was he planning to do with me? I could have sworn that smirk widened. Today, dear, you will be turning some lovely human hosts into powerful werewolves, just like you were. It is the gift that keeps giving. Isn't that wonderful? I shook my head. No, I said, stepping away from my bars. You can't make me. But he could. We both knew that. Extracting a key from his pocket, the male stuck it in the lock, and after a few long moments of clinking, the door finally swung open. For a fleeting moment, I debated running. But to where? I didn't know. Besides, Azriel had every inch of control over my body. Running would be useless. So, I stood frozen like a deer in the headlights as he approached, movements cold and fluid. He stuck out his hand, his smile inviting. Take my hand, darling. Allow me to lead the way. Go to hell, I hissed, satisfied by the hurt that flickered in his gaze. However, my satisfaction was short-lived as the invisible bonds forced my hand up, locking it in his. I struggled against his grasp, but I knew it was futile. We all did. So, without another word, Azriel dragged me down the halls, away from the only two people I had left to trust in this world. The wet cobbles were cold and slippery beneath my feet, so much so that Azriel had to stop and catch me a few times as I fell. Something I didn't appreciate. I would have much preferred slamming my face into hard rock than his steadying hand on my back. It was only the fifth time that I tripped did we stop, Azriel's quick arm stopping me from flying face first into cold cobbles. You're weak, Kyra, he said, his voice laced with an emotion I couldn't quite pin. I stared at him in the darkness, though I couldn't see much other than his blue eyes and the outline of his face. You've been starving yourself, haven't you? I remained silent. I was weak, very weak. I'd known that from the moment we'd started our walk down these corridors. I could barely hold myself up, let alone with the slippery stones at my feet. Azriel sighed at my silence. You're only hurting yourself, Kyra, he muttered, squeezing my hand with affection. Anger sliced through me at the gesture. I do not intend to hurt you, Kyra, he continued, I only want what's best for you, for us. My offer still stands. You can stand by my side and be free, so long as you are well and truly on board. I spat in his face. Burn in hell, I hissed, giving him a glare that could kill. I'll never be free so long as I'm under that stupid bond of yours. I refuse to be your puppet. Azriel said nothing. For a moment, I worried I'd gone too far. After all, it wasn't very smart to spit on your captor's face. But then he kept walking, dragging me along as though nothing had happened. I couldn't make out his face to see any anguish or anger, but by his posture, he seemed pretty composed. However, I didn't have much time to ponder it before we reached the end of the hall, where two doors stood. With a swift push, they shot open, and what I saw behind them made me crumple with despair. There were people, human people bound in chains, their eyes wide and afraid. A few of them noticed Azriel's arrival, whilst others seemed too shocked in their own skin to care. The ones that weren't tugged on their bounds, eyes growing wider as we approached. I turned to Azriel, whose face was hard as stone. What are you doing to them? I yelled, jerking my arm. Surprisingly, he released me. For a few moments, he said nothing. Absolutely nothing. Then, the ghost of a smile crossed his lips. It's the gift that keeps on giving. I went white with fury. I was about to call him every curse word under the sun, when that invisible hand grabbed me, forcing me to bend before my first victim. I stared into his wide, frightened eyes. They were teal, like the surface of a calm lake, the ones that glinted gold in the sunset. My eyes roved over his face, trying to minimize every feature, every crevice before I ruined his life, who he was. I tried to convey an apology with my gaze, as my voice failed me, but the male seemed too frightened to acknowledge it. I felt someone kneel beside me. Azriel. Are you ready, Kyra? No, I sobbed. No, Azriel, and if you really loved me, you wouldn't make me do this. Silence. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope he was considering my offer. But then, that invisible grasp wrapped its way around me, controlled amounts of lunar energy being sent to the surface as my canines took form. No. I screamed. No. But I had no control over my body. I watched on like an observer as my mouth wrapped around the man's neck, my teeth sinking into his soft skin. Something inside me, something deep within my heart cracked at the man's screams, at his anguished eyes as I damned him with the fate of a monster. Tears rolled down my cheeks as a metallic tang entered my mouth. I wanted nothing more than to pull away, to sink to the floor and sob, but I simply couldn't. I was under his control. Once the man stopped struggling, my grip on his body was released, teeth shining with blood. I watched on with building dread, as I moved on to the next person, their face as white as mine would have been, had I control over my body. And the process repeated itself: bite, scream, and pass out, and along with it another cursed soul. A soul cursed by me. At some point, we'd run out of human candidates, but I was far too lost in my own head to notice. I was returned to my cell, aware of nothing but the blood in my mouth and the heaviness in my heart. I fell into a restless sleep that night, one filled with screams and blood. One filled with demons and monsters, each one staring at me with azure eyes, gleaming with victory. Chapter 62. Every day was the same. Wake up, remember my sad reality, get taken out to bite innocent people, go back to my cell, then curl up in a ball and fall asleep, praying for both the sake of me and the humans that I wouldn't wake up the next day. That never happened, of course, but it was the only thing that brought me sleep. Zion had tried talking to me, as did Alia. I ignored them, or rather, I couldn't face them. Not after everything I'd done. I couldn't bring myself to answer their queries, their concerns. Perhaps that made me an asshole, considering what I'd done to involve both of them in this mess, but I just couldn't. I was weak. After what felt like weeks of this, I finally came to accept that going to sleep and hoping for death simply wasn't going to cut it, nor would ignoring my friends. There was no way out of this situation, unlike Zion had insisted, by death or otherwise. But what gave me the right to turn a blind eye to my friends, because of my own cowardice? Nothing. Nothing gave me the right. So, when Zion asked me a tentative, "Are you okay?" One day, I finally answered, "Yes, I'm fine." Choppy, and maybe a little curt, but it was a good start. I could basically feel Zion's relief at the sound of my voice, the relief of knowing I hadn't entirely lost myself. Across the halls, I saw Alia's figure perk up as well. The sight hurt my heart. "Kyra," Zion said, his voice heavy with an emotion I knew all too well nowadays. Anguish. He remained silent, but that one word had conveyed everything. His relief that I was still here. His anger towards Azriel. His frustration at the situation, of the injustice it brought us. The hope that was beginning to dwindle. Silence filled the halls, a silence so much louder than before. "I'm glad you're okay, Kyra," Alia offered, and my heart wrenched. Her words were so sincere, so understanding. She should be yelling at me, berating me for getting her involved in this mess. But she wouldn't, and that was what hurt the most. Zion told me what they are doing. What he's doing. Her voice trailed off. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to chase away the azure eyes that floated in my mind, trying to dissolve the sensation of flesh under my teeth, as I turned humans into beings not even the werewolves seemed to accept. cursing them with the same fate that had been thrust upon me, a worse one at that. Aelia? I asked, hearing the weariness in my own voice. The pain, the guilt, and hunger were beginning to catch up to me. I swallowed. Aelia, why aren't you angry at me? You haven't said one damning word to me, not once. So? Why? Silence. I squeezed my eyes shut, preparing for the long-awaited tongue-lashing, the berating that was long overdue. Why would I be mad at you, Kyra? You were deceived. Her words shattered my heart in two. For the first time in perhaps weeks, tears formed in my eyes. No, I did this, I insisted, voice breaking. I ignored Zion's warnings. I gave in to my selfish desires to involve you in this world. In my stupid, little imaginary world, I really believed. I really believed we could still be friends. Hell, I even envisioned us having picnics at the forest's edge. But now look at us. Kyra. It's all my fault. I yelled, voice cracking with anguish. The tears were rolling in rivers now. It's my fucking fault, Aelia, and you're just too much of a sweetheart to say it. Please, just yell at me, Kyra, stop. It was Zion. I could see the golden torchlight gleaming in his dim, green eyes. Blaming yourself won't help the situation we are in, you have to remember that. We must keep our heads up and our hopes high, else we'll never get out of this mess. We are not getting out of this mess, Zion. I snapped, don't you get it? This is our life now. They are drugging you up with wolfsbane, something that will kill you in good time, because of me. And it won't be long before they drug Aelia, either. Silence. I instantly found myself wishing I could suck the words back into my mouth. I was in no place to lash out at them, especially when I was the reason they are stuck here. I opened my mouth to apologize when that blood-curdling scrape sounded down the hall. We all stilled. I looked between Aelia and Zion, though I couldn't see anything more than their silhouettes against the dark. Zion shook with fear, and the sight made my stomach lurch. Of course, the wolfsbane injections were starting to wear him down. Aelia, fortunately, had been put in silver bands. Not chains, I knew, but simple bracelets that seemed welded into her skin. We listened as stark footsteps filled the halls, to the marching drumbeat of our fates. I knew who it was before he even appeared before the cell door, that grin wide and pleasant as usual. My eyes shot to his hands, looking for any needles, and I sagged with relief. No wolfsbane, for now. Zion was safe. Zion was safe. Kyra, I believe you will like what I have to say, Azriel purred. His voice made me nauseous, but I fought to keep my chin high as he continued, the people of the court have started to worry about your absence. You will now be free to come up and roam the court for a few hours. My heart accelerated. This would be my chance to find help, to escape. However, any building hope I had gutted at the sinister light in Azriel's eyes. Do not get so excited, my dear. I still have full control over you, as well as what you say. You won't be able to leave the court grounds without my say-so, nor will you be able to tell anyone about this. He motioned towards the cell. The blood drained from my face, and I wanted nothing more than to sink to my knees and scream my frustration. I was trapped. Wholly trapped, forced to do this man's bidding. The moment I thought there was an opportunity to escape, it was snatched away by him. It always was. You're a bastard, I hissed, giving him a cold glare. I couldn't glean his reaction, not with the shadows cast across his face, but his tense posture told me enough. For some reason, he didn't like when I insulted him, or insisted that I didn't love him. In saying this, he continued, his voice slightly edged, you will be required to go out into towns and make up salons there. People are starting to get suspicious, and we can't risk bringing any more humans onto the grounds. There was a controlled edge to his tone, a deadly calm. I suppressed my shivers. A cold chuckle rumbled from his throat. Don't be so sullen, my dear. This is your chance to see the sun again, so I wouldn't take it for granted. There was that edge again, that warning. But why was he threatening me if I could do nothing against him? Before I could think up an answer, the bars to my door were being slid aside, so there was nothing separating me and the man I'd once loved. Something primal rose up in me, a fear that begged me to scramble backwards, to lash out and hiss. But I didn't do any of that. I wouldn't allow him the satisfaction. That was until he extended his hand, and every muscle in me leaded. I couldn't move, couldn't so much as think as he caressed my cheek, his touch rooting me to the spot. I could feel Zion bristling somewhere in the back, a rage akin to the one roiling in my own gut, silenced by the magic he used to control me. He gave me a pout. What's wrong, dear? You look like you wish to slap me. Fuck. You? I ground out, struggling against those binds. With whatever little bit of me I had left, I lifted a stiff hand and swiped him across the face. It wasn't the slap itself that had impact, in fact. I was barely able to move my palm. Fortunately, there was an upside to being kept in a place with no nail clippers, allowing me to easily scratch up the bastard's face with my unkempt talons. Azriel stumbled back, shocked. I sagged in relief as he lost his grip on me, and I was able to stand on my own again. Carefully, in disbelief, he palpated his face, hot blood running between his fingers. Shock and hurt alike flashed through those azure eyes, then anger. He opened his mouth as though to say something, but I beat him to it. I will escape this place, you sick fuck. I spat, feeling the venom on my own tongue. I will escape. Alive or dead, I will get out. I will get out and you know it. Azriel's face schooled into indifference. Then, he chuckled, shaking his head. Dear Kyra, he muttered, like a parent scolding their child, it seems that flaming temper of yours makes you forget that I have control over you, and always will. The iciness of his tone made my blood run cold. Just then, those binds seized both my legs, making me rigid. Azriel smirked, though it didn't meet his eyes. Now, come with me, dear. Against my will, my legs walked, following the man who'd doomed us all. The man who'd doomed me. I tried to toss a glance back towards Alia or Zion, hoping I could catch their eyes, but Azriel was quick to lock the muscles in my neck and keep my gaze forward. That fiery confidence birthed by Azriel's appearance began to wane, and with it panic took its place. Faces of those I'd damned flashed through my mind, with those pleading eyes and horror-stricken faces. I didn't like to think where they were being kept, or how they were being kept. I wondered if they too slept on cold cobblestones at night, living on nothing on mildewed air and moldy food. Or worse. What if they were being abused? I shook my head of the thought, feeling slightly ill. I slid my eyes to the man at my right, his hands in his pockets, as though he didn't have invisible claws holding me. He hadn't made a move on me, not in an intimate way at least. But maybe that would change. Who's to say he wouldn't get impatient with my constant rebellion? He had full, utter control over me, and he could do what he wished. Even. A whirl of wind to my side, and a real fist was tugging on my chin. My eyes widened as Azriel's face appeared before mine, azure eyes caught between pain and anger. Do not think for a second that I'd ever do anything like that to you, he hissed, hands shaking slightly. I blinked. Had I said my thoughts out loud? How had he known what I was thinking? He blinked at me for a few moments. Then, slowly, he removed his grip on my chin, clearing his throat. I can hear your thoughts shooting down the bond, he said, and my blood iced over. Was that another part of this sick bond? That he could hear my thoughts as well? He winced. Only when you say it like that. Sometimes, I can hear nothing. Other times you're practically yelling at me. My hands shook. I didn't even have the privacy of my own damn thoughts. I had nothing left for myself, not even my own mind. Calm down, dear, his voice rumbled. I whirled to him but, sure enough, he remained still. This is how the bond works, he said again, his voice like a lover's caress. Bile rose to my throat. I didn't know when to tell you. Apologies, my darling. I stood there for a few moments, silent. Get the hell out of my head, I snarled, giving him a look almost as lethal as my words. His face was once again trained into that of neutrality, though something flashed through his gaze. Before I could figure out what, he turned on his heel and resumed walking again, forcing me to follow in tow. Chapter 63. Azriel took me into the main room, and led me to a chamber off to the right. I tried not to look too long at the wall opposite the marble altar, the wall where I'd taken the souls of humans and replaced them with new ones. I could have sworn I glimpsed a few drops of dried blood along the floor. Wordlessly, Azriel pushed open the chamber's door. I blinked. The room within was very much unlike anywhere else in this crappy dungeon. The cobblestone walls had been smoothed out, the floor itself replaced with white marble. Along the sides of the room stood many metal stalls, their shower heads peeping from just over the lips. In the middle sat a long, wooden bench. I blinked. Of course, this place wasn't just built to keep prisoners. It was also built to endure attacks, and so a communal bathing chamber wasn't surprising. Azriel's hand glided to the small of my back, and it took every fiber of my being not to flinch. The maids will see to you, was all he said, before turning on his heel to walk away. He stopped after several paces, as though debating if he should say more, before resuming his exit of the room, shutting the door loudly behind him. I blinked again. In my first scan of the room, I'd missed the green-cloaked figures lurking in the background. Maid, Azriel had called them, but I knew what that forest green color meant. Omegas. Still, the pelters were embroidered with purple rather than the usual gold. Strange, I thought to myself as they approached. I debated asking them for help before I glimpsed their stone-set faces. Their eyes were cold and unfeeling, and that was when I knew why they had different pelters. These were Azriel's underlings, answering directly to him, carrying out whatever tasks that were needed down in this hell hole. They'd probably never stepped foot out of these catacombs, and judging by their pale skin, I didn't doubt it, either. Roughly, 2 of the maids grabbed my rags and pulled them off despite my protest, whilst a third started a shower. I tried to ignore the cold air that kissed my bare skin, along with the embarrassment of being naked in front of strangers. If they cared, they didn't let on. Instead, they grabbed my wrists and dragged me towards the shower. I didn't bother struggling. I was sure the iron door behind me was locked, and something told me these Omegas were much more powerful than their figures let on. And with my suppressed magic and weakened state already, I wasn't planning on finding out if that were true. I had no time to prepare before I was thrust under the shower. I gasped. This water was cold, icy cold, as though it had been held underground for years. I tried to suppress my shivers, as the maids silently scrubbed along my body, one working on my hair, whilst the other scrubbed what could only have been weeks' worth off grime my skin. When they reached my intimate areas, I gave a little hiss, implying I could take care of it myself, and fortunately they seemed to respect my wishes. Once I was cleaner than I had been in weeks, the water shut off and I was handed a towel. Meekly, I toweled myself off, relishing the warmth it provided as one of the maids gathered a bundle of white cloth sitting on the bench. I paused mid-stroke, swallowing. A dress? A day dress. I really was going out there, back out into a world I hadn't seen for what felt like an eternity. I would be seeing all those people again, people like Raina, and they'd be praising and worshipping me, just as they'd always done. And I'd be forced to plaster a smile on my face and pretend everything was fantastic, that I wasn't being held captive by the man they called their leader. I scanned the maids' faces as they pulled the dress over me. They held no indication of remorse or sympathy. In a way, they looked broken, mindless. I shuddered to think what had happened to them, and if I would bear the same face once this was over, once I'd ruined as many lives as I could with my own mortal stupidity. Silence continued to haunt the space, even when the maids stepped back with bored looks on their faces, eyes sliding to the door. My cue to leave. Almost in a daze, I stood and lumbered towards the door, my exhaustion weighing on my shoulders. I was certainly skinnier than I had been, but it wouldn't be enough to cause alert. It seemed a semi-immortal body had its own ways of countering starvation, even when I had not touched that shit they delivered at my cell not once. As though sensing my presence, the door swung open. Azriel stared at me, smiling. Smiling just like he had on the day of moonfall. Smiling just like he had after he kissed me, when we stared into each other's eyes until night came to claim us. The smile of a lover. A betrayer. He held out his arm. I didn't even bother to resist as invisible chains hoisted my own arm, interlacing it with his. My lips turned up as those invisible controls tugged at them, forcing me into a fake smile. I stared at him. His stupid binds couldn't make that smile meet my eyes, no matter how hard he tried. It seemed he knew that, too, for his face had gone hard like rock. I felt a flash of anger, then. Nothing. I felt nothing these days, other than the bonds that tugged me around like a puppet. Otherwise, I just felt numb. Without another word, he led me through the corridors. My mind drifted off to a different time, a different place as my legs followed on autopilot. A place where there was no Azriel, no werewolves. A place I'd found myself visiting a lot in my dreams, a place that had kept me sane all these weeks. A clearing in a grove, a sparkling pond at its edge. There was no misery there, no false bond keeping me tethered to someone I hated. There was only freedom, something I had once taken for granted. And something I would probably never get again. Before long, I was walking up cobble steps. Azriel pushed open the wooden trapdoor with a grunt, and I wasn't surprised to see no people milling about the courtyard. This was probably some werewolf glamour. After all, I really knew little about werewolves. Blindly believing in my mate bond with Azriel proved that. Rustling leaves. Whistling winds. Voices. Many voices. Clamor. I looked towards the direction of the feasting hall, towards all the noise. That hell-damned smile was still upon my lips, and I wanted nothing more than to tear my face off. Come now, Kyra love, Azriel said, leading me by his arm towards the archways. Your people are eager to see you. My chest caved at the words. My people. These weren't my people. They were as deceived as I. They had no idea I was being held captive and being used as nothing more than a slave by their beloved leader. They didn't know of the torture I was enduring, of what my friends were enduring. So, something close to fear built in my chest as we ducked under the marble arches, the wooden doors sealed shut. Gripping the handle, Azriel spared me not a look as he schooled his face into a pleasant smile, sending the doors forward. Silence, then some shuffling and scrapes of chairs. I could feel the eyes on me, feel them, but not really see them. I felt locked in my own cage, blind to everything, everyone, yet still that smile persisted on my face. Luna Kyra. Someone called. Similar words followed. She's back. Thank the gods for her good health. She blesses us once again. I heard none of them. My eyes were focused on the table at the head, where a great black seat, a silver one at its side. I couldn't bring myself to look at the smirking Gammas, or the bored Zeta, her nonchalance more haunting than any smirk or sneer. My feet moved as we walked towards the head table. I finally took the liberty to look at all those faces. They passed like smears on a canvas, all sorts of expressions casting along their features, so many that I couldn't discern which was right. Anger. Joy. Fear. Or? None of it made sense. When I focused on a face, I'd see them instead, the human faces. The ones I'd memorized even though I'd tried so hard not to. Panic surged in my veins and the urge to vomit consumed me whole. If it wasn't for Azriel's iron grip on me, I may have emptied my stomach on the floor, not that there was anything to empty. Mindlessly I took my seat, staring at the plate before me. Turkey drizzled in gravy, something I may have once loved, but now regarded with disgust. I didn't even get to look at it for long, not as my eyes were forced upwards, that force pulling tighter on my mouth. Greetings all. The words tumbled from my mouth, and I didn't even bother to fight them. I am joyed to be feasting with you once again. I have recently been on a long and arduous journey to one of our outposts with Lord Zion, who shall be back soon. That made me sit up. Would Zion be here too? Playing this false charade so Azriel could save his own hide. So, please, the words continued. I lifted the champagne glass before me, its pale gold liquid distorting the faces of those who watched me. Let us enjoy this celebration. Cheers of approval roared in response. Azriel gave me an encouraging smile, but I just dodged his gaze. I couldn't see his expression as he lessened the grip on my mouth, enough so that it wasn't stretching my face with a false smile, but still firm enough to prevent a frown. I allowed my eyes to rove the crowd again. Fortunately, everyone was focused on their meals, aside from one familiar blue-eyed individual, her gaze as cold and hard as ever. Her eyes flicked between me and Azriel, a soft frown on her lips. If I wasn't so empty, I may have chuckled. Of course Azure would be jealous of me after everything that had happened. A painful pang resounded in my heart, and I felt a flash jealousy myself as I stared at her. If only she knew what it was like to be with him, at his utter disposal. If only she knew of how lucky she was to have freedom, to feel emotions for more than just a brief moment. My eyes were forced to my plate, and my hand went to the fork. I gave Azriel a sidelong glance, his hard expression saying, "Eat." But it wasn't like I could do otherwise as my hand gripped the silverware, shivering as the prongs sank into the meat, reminding me of canines sinking into flesh. All I could taste was human blood when I placed a piece in my mouth. Still, I was forced to swallow. Amid the clamor, a red-headed man slipped in unnoticed, his clothes as prim and proper as mine. Only someone with a keen eye could spot the paleness in his usually tanned complexion, the hollowness of his cheeks from weeks' worth of wolfsbane. Noting my stare, Azriel leaned into my ear and whispered, "Don't worry, dear. Us three have big plans for tonight." I squeezed my eyes shut, swallowing. I didn't want to contemplate what that might mean. For me. For us. Chapter 64 Zion. It didn't take a master to see it. Beyond the false smile, the forced actions, the forced words. It was so obvious. Kyra was breaking. And there was nothing I could do about it. So I continued watching her from afar, keeping to the back as our little party traversed the woods. Truth be told, I'd been watching her all day, well, as much as I could. Just as Azriel had demanded she do lunar duties, he'd demanded I do beta duties, too, including training. I'd tried to hide my weakened state from my pupils, but I could tell they knew. Of course, they didn't know it was the wolfsbane in my system, slowly eating me away. But then again, that wasn't the only thing being eaten away. Seeing Kyra deteriorate before my eyes. It was killing me. Killing me more than any lethal drug would. I'd seen her at the feasting, with that superficial smile that didn't meet those eyes. Eyes that had become a dull dark grey, very unlike the fierce black I used to know. The life in them, the fierceness. It was all gone. No one else noticed or cared. I'd seen her talking to people of the court, and they seemed too damn enamored by her presence to notice something was wrong, that she needed help. That she was being tormented by the man she once loved. I glared at his back, his figure tall and dark beside Kyra. Pride radiated off him in waves, and it angered me. How dare he exploit her and feel any sense of pride? What kind of man does that to someone, to a woman he claims to love? A friend. He used to be my friend, my savior. But things change. He was my sworn enemy now, and one day I would make him pay for this. I would give him a death, so painful to give him a taste of what he'd put Kyra through, and maybe even that wouldn't be enough. I stared ahead, towards the trees that were starting to thin, towards the chugging noise of a distant human town. And now he was leading her to her hometown, where she could turn people into monsters, just as he had once turned her. I clenched my fists. I hadn't even known Azriel had turned her. I, as blinded by my loyalty as she was by love, believed Azriel when he claimed it had been an alpha from a different pack. But no, it had been him. It was always him. But then that brought other thoughts, selfish thoughts. Why did it have to be her that night? How, of all people, my mate? Why couldn't it have been some other girl? Some girl that would have died during the transformation anyway. Why did it have to be her? So much pain could have been avoided, for both of us. I wouldn't care about some other girl like I did for her. I never would, because she was my mate. My mate. But was she really my mate? She said she'd never felt a strong connection with anyone, and the strongest one she had felt turned out to be a fraud. I knew mate bonds often kicked in for one person earlier than the other, but surely she would have felt it by now, right? Or you're her dud mate, came that irksome thought. I shoved it aside. No, I couldn't be. I'd never felt a mate bond in my 150 years of existence. If I developed one now, then it just had to be real. Because I wouldn't know what to do with myself if it weren't. I returned my gaze ahead, the fluorescent lights and rumbling of cars clearer now. Something in my heart fissured at the little human houses, at their gabled roofs and cobbled paths. Kyra had lived in one of these unassuming houses once, a peaceful life void of violence and misery. And it had been stolen from her, just like everything else in her life. And to think I'd just told her to suck it up. I chewed my cheek as I looked at her again. There was nothing I regretted more than how I treated her in those initial months. How I'd pushed her to the edge, because of some skewed moral code of mine. I recalled the time she attacked me, and if I was honest, I deserved that and 100 more. Please, came a weak voice. My vision blurred. Kyra. She sounded so small, so scared, and I wanted nothing more than to kill Azriel and his gammas right then and there. I wanted to hold her and tell her everything would be okay, that would be okay. But I couldn't. Please, don't make me do this, she continued. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the pain that bleated in my chest. A soft chuckle, and fury slammed me. My eyes snapped to Azriel's dark form. I snarled. I would kill him. I would kill him in a damn heartbeat if I could. But not in the state I was now. I could barely stand on 2 feet, and magic was out of the question. We must, my dear, he cooed, saying it as if he cared. As if he actually cared about her, like the way she'd once cared about him. We cannot risk bringing humans into the court. She shook her head, and I just looked to the ground in shame. The one time she needed protection, my protection, I couldn't give it to her. I'd failed her once with my warning and failed her again now. Once we reached the edge of the forest, Azriel raised his hand in signal to halt. Slowly, he turned to Kyra, placing his hand on her shoulder. I couldn't stand to watch as her eyes turned to gold, as something else in her heart seemed to snap. Before long Kyra prowled in her wolf form, those gold eyes dull like extinguished flames. Not even the indigo tint shone on her fur, but was rather replaced by a dull grey. Azriel led us to sidewalk where he made her sit in the bushes, waiting, whilst the rest of sat hidden within a garden of overgrown shrubbery and weeds. My heart sunk as a human male walked by, whistling low to himself. Then, like a hawk on its prey, Kyra was all snapping jaws and flashing canines, as she jumped on the human, sinking her teeth deep into that point on his throat. The human, like many of them, was too stunned to scream move. It wasn't like he had time, because the gammas were up in an instant, knocking him cold and tying him in ropes. That dead look persisted in Kyra's gaze, even when she went back into the bush, resuming her position. Azriel's eyes had not left her once. They couldn't, not while he was controlling her every action, her every bite. He used her body as a vessel, a puppet, with no regard for the fiery soul trapped within. The fiery soul he was extinguishing. By the time Kyra was upon her fifth victim, I couldn't stand to watch. At same point we got up and moved, likely due to all the blood that had pooled on the pavement. I dared a glimpse into those cold eyes, hoping for any sign of Kyra, to see any signs of her hanging on. Dead? Completely, utterly dead, like a gutted candle. Fury engulfed me again, but I could do nothing. Eventually we happened upon an alleyway, a place full of nooks and shadows for us to hide. Azriel and his gammas crouched in the back right, while Kyra lingered behind a few bins, ready to attack. I just watched, even as a girl walked by, her eyes bloodshot and back hunched. My heart stopped. The human girl looked about Kyra's age, with falling brown hair and pale skin. A girl, another young girl like her. I glanced towards Kyra, and her wolf form was stiff. To curse a girl with this curse, a girl her age. It would break her. Break her more than she's already been broken. I could see it in the tenseness of her posture, of her reluctance in those golden eyes. I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't let them break Kyra any more than they had. I had to do something. I had to do anything, even just to spare her this marginal pain, even if it costed my life. I watched in slow motion as Kyra sprang forward, sending the girl to the ground. The girl's bloodshot eyes went wide as they took in Kyra's beastly form, but I could see Kyra's hesitation, her resistance against Azriel's command. The gammas were circling her now. Perhaps it was hope, or stupidity, but something hot and wild fueled me as I barreled into the gammas and slammed myself into Kyra's furry body, throwing us both off the girl. The gammas stood around in shock. Fortunately, the girl still had enough mind to get to her feet and run. Those few moments of shock cost Azriel and his underlings everything, for within moments, she was gone. I looked around. Kyra's golden eyes were focused on me now, brighter than before, bright with what I could only describe as gratitude. So were Azriel's, but his were bright with a different emotion. No, that was the light of fury. Even so, I raised my chin and locked his gaze. I didn't know if Kyra had managed to bite that girl, but even if she did, her getting away spared her from Azriel's grasp. I leveled my gaze with Azriel's. Beat him, was all he said. I didn't even have time to register his words before a thudding blow to the temple set my vision spinning. Another hit to the forehead, and my brain throbbed. A aching hit to my ribs, my hips, followed by cracks and blooming pain. I could see the gammas smirking above me, relishing every moment of this abuse. Black dots swam in my vision, and the darkness tugged at my mind, offering me peace, quiet. But I couldn't go under yet. I had to hear it. I had to stop. Came her voice. Stop. That voice alone was enough to wash away any pain, any misery. In the storm of punches and swipes, no one saw the small smile that formed on my mouth. Kyra was still there. Those words alone proved she was still alive, still thinking, feeling. She wasn't a husk yet. That's all I needed to know, all I needed to hear to go embrace the darkness in peace. Even if my life ended tonight. A hard kick to my skull, and everything went dark. If you enjoy Kyra's story, don't forget to subscribe, more excitement is coming.